Selling an apartment in New York City with existing tenants in place can be much more challenging than selling a vacant apartment. This is especially so if you're selling a co-op or a single-family home, which is not catering to an investor-buyer base, as the buyer will likely be an owner-occupant who won't want a tenant to be in place post-closing. If you're thinking of buying an apartment, you can estimate your buyer closing costs in New York City using Houseit's interactive closing cost calculator, available at www.houseit.com. While you're visiting, you can also learn how to save on commission and closing costs through our agent-assisted FSBO and 1% full-service listing options for sellers in New York City. If you're selling a condo or multifamily property, having an existing tenant can actually be beneficial. This is because the majority of investor buyers would ideally like to have a tenant in place as quickly as possible after closing. In some cases, investors specifically look for units with tenants in place in order to minimize the risk of vacancy and zero cash flow generation after closing. Regardless of what property type you're selling, the best-case scenario is to have an existing tenant on a month-to-month lease. Investors will like the idea of carrying over the tenant post-closing, and owner-occupants will appreciate the flexibility of being able to terminate the lease so that they can take occupancy of the property right away. It's also equally valuable to have a tenant in place, provided that the lease has an early termination clause in the event of a sale. The key disadvantage of having a tenant in place, regardless of the lease terms, is the fact that it's significantly more difficult to accommodate private showing requests and hold open houses. Another disadvantage is the possibility that the tenant keeps the unit in an unsightly condition, perhaps even so bad to the extent that it's not possible to take professional photos. Is it easier to sell a vacant apartment or one with a tenant in place? It's much easier to sell a vacant apartment. If the lease does not clearly lay out the notice periods for showings, a tenant could make unreasonable demands, such as requiring 3 or even 5 days' notice for any viewings. If a tenant is really uncooperative or resentful, they could essentially sabotage the entire sale process by routinely declining all open house requests. Under a worst-case scenario, the tenant could simply not respond to all showing requests, which means you'd never be able to show your home. Should a seller wait until the tenant has vacated before listing? It depends. If your tenant is highly uncooperative or keeps the apartment in an unsightly condition, it may be advisable to wait for them to vacate before listing. This is because the condition of the apartment would make it impossible to take professional photos, and buyers who do view the property may lose interest in the unit simply because it's messy or dirty. Listing your home with a tenant in place isn't always a bad thing, especially if the tenant is generally cooperative and keeps the apartment relatively organized. Most investors will actually prefer that a tenant is already in place, as it means there's no risk of vacancy shortly after closing. The other key drawback to waiting until a tenant has vacated before selling is the fact that you'll have no rental income to offset your carrying costs during the sale process, which can take 6 months or more in New York City.